Morning. My name is Jim Gilmartin, and it's my privilege on behalf of the ECCL board and executive management team to welcome you to the 202nd meeting of the ECCL. Amazing, 202nd, going back to 2020, long time. We are accepting questions during this meeting, as we typically do. At the end of each speaker's comments, I will ask for any questions or comments. We will try to answer as many as possible, but due to time limits, we may have to cut some back. Hopefully we won't. Finally, we are recording this meeting, and you'll be notified when it's available on the ECCL website, which is www.esterotoday.com. You'll be getting an email, and you just click that and you can see it all again if you like. I'd like to turn this over to Mark Novitski for a moment. Mark.
Thanks, Jim. Let's all pause and take a moment, remembering all those that are affected by the current COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to introduce our panelists today, the folks that you're looking at now. First, we're really happy. Our guest speaker is Matt Feeney, Assistant Manager of Bonita Springs. Also joining us today are Mark Novitski, our Chief Operating Officer, Barry Freedman, our Chief Membership Development Officer, Allan, Bowditch, our Chief Communications Officer, and last but not least, John Quin, our Chief Financial Officer. So let me introduce you, tell you a little bit about Matt, and then he'll talk to you about this bioreactor. Matt Feeney, as I said, is the Assistant Manager of the City of Bonita Springs. He became a Public Works Director back in 2012. And he oversaw the development and construction of a $20 million Bonita Springs downtown improvement project, named one of the 12 Best Complete Streets initiative in 2017 nationwide by Smart Growth America. Today, however, Matt will discuss the Phelps Avenue Bioreactor project, which won the Florida League's of Cities Environmental Stewardship Award. The project is aimed at reducing the amount of nitrogen along the Imperial River, which runs directly through the city of Bonita Springs. And ultimately, the project improves the overall water quality, and it is reported to be the first of its kind in Florida. In addition to successfully reducing the nitrogen levels and effectively improving the overall water quality, the city praises the project for its ease of scalability, low aesthetic impact, and cost effectiveness. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Matt, and you've got it, Matt.
Thank you, Jim. I'm gonna share my screen here with a brief PowerPoint presentation to explain the project.
Sure.
Okay, as I said, I'm Matt Feeney. I'm the Assistant City Manager at Bonita Springs, and I'm going to be speaking about a recent project that we completed called the Phelps Avenue Bioreactor. It is located in downtown Bonita Springs on a city block that's about 3 acres in size, and it is immediately adjacent to the old 41 corridor that we renovated back in 2017 with the Complete Streets project that we recently were recognized for. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to why Bonita was looking at a project like this, and what the reasons were for needing to address water quality in Bonita Springs. Bonita Springs has what is called a basin management action plan, and that is essentially a restoration plan that the city and the state have agreed to improve water quality in Bonita Springs. In this case, the Basin Management Action Plan is for the freshwater portions of the Imperial River, and it is to reduce nitrogen, which is a component of fertilizer and considered a pollutant if it's in excessive levels, out of the Imperial River. So the shape on the right of the screen in the image is the freshwater drainage basin. So all the rain that lands in that shape that's kind of tea-stained makes its way into the Imperial River. On average, we get about 52 inches of rain. And what happens is, depending on the type of land and soil, but also the use of the land, whether it's residential or natural, we get different amounts of nitrogen coming into the Imperial River. So what happened back in 2012, it was really a culmination of a lot of work that had really initiated in the early 2000s, is the state identified that there were low dissolved oxygen levels in the river, with which leads to stress on fish, and just not a perfect healthy environment for aquatic animals. But what they said was, the reason we think we have low dissolved oxygen levels is because we have too much nitrogen or fertilizer, for simplicity purposes, in the river. And so because of that, they established what is called a TMDL, or total maximum daily load. It's essentially a speed limit. And they said, look, the Imperial River, in our estimation, needs to be, on average, have 0.74 milligrams of nitrogen per liter of water in it. Currently, it has about 1 milligram per liter of nitrogen. And the reasoning that it has more than 0.74 is, as folks developed in the corridor, we started introducing agricultural uses in the headlands, which requires fertilizer and active management of the land. But we also developed the land with our own housing units, with manicured lawns and modern drainage systems that allow nitrogen and other nutrients to get into the river at rates that they wouldn't normally have gone in a pre-development scenario. So as part of the way to achieve the 0.74 speed limit, the state worked with essentially the governmental entities that were contributing to that watershed. Bonita Springs is one of the main stakeholders, but you can see on the chart to the right, Lee County is also a partner, as well as FDOT in the form of the interstate and agriculture. So to achieve the reduction, essentially quotas were handed out to the individual stakeholders. The city has a quota of 9,000 pounds, or plus 9,903 to be exact, to reduce over the next 15 years, dating back to 2012. You may notice that agriculture has the largest stake. They have about 48,000 pounds that they need to work to reduce over the next few years, and they will be working with the Department of Agriculture to implement things such as bioreactors or best management practices to get that reduction. The science here is, if you can reduce the numbers here on the right of the screen on an annual basis by 60,000 pounds, you will achieve a loading rate of 0.74 milligrams. So what does this mean for the city? Well, what this means is the city, to achieve its reduction, needs to do projects that will reduce nitrogen loading in the river only in the areas that are coincident with the red corporate boundary of the city and the T-stain shape, associated with the freshwater drainage basin. So as you can see, everything to the left of the red line or south of it is within the city's corporate limits. And those are the areas where the city can site projects to do water quality improvements. You may notice that a lot of the land is developed. Some of it is in the form of gated communities. And other places it is in the earliest part of Bonita's development, the old downtown area. But it's a fairly urbanized environment. And so it makes siting projects fairly difficult, quite honestly. The project we're going to talk about is sited where the gold star is, down on the bottom left of the image. So how did these quotas come to be? It's really a mathematical model. And I touch on this not for you to commit to memory all of the things that are here, but just to understand that it is a mathematical model that is being applied to the type of soil, the type of land use, and the amount of runoff that is generated. So on the right here, you see different types of land uses listed and the types of nitrogen loading that is estimated to come from them. And what you'll see is that up at the top of that chart, essentially medium density residential and multifamily residential, so residential housing, is estimated to generate some of the largest loads in nitrogen. So the more dense you are, the more effect you're going to have on the river system itself. This is just another slide that illustrates those loadings are then applied to the type of soil, as well as to how quickly a drop of rainwater makes it into the imperial system. So for example, if a drop of rainwater lands on the roadway itself, it will immediately be conveyed to the river through the storm drainage piping that gets water off the road. So all of this is factored in, and loadings are established for the city and urban development. They are also used to model how effective current stormwater treatment technology is. So the point of this is everything is done through a fairly complicated mathematical model, A, to evaluate the rate of pollution, but B, to evaluate the rate of removal for existing technologies. And this is really what drove the city to start to look for something different. Because if you use the existing kind of pre-approved technologies that the state regulators accept as tried and true, it really steers you towards a couple of simple solutions. You've probably seen them throughout Southwest Florida. They're pictured here in this slide. And they're essentially dry retention, which is on the top, which is a dry, grassy area that is allowed to hold a specific volume of water when it rains and then force it to percolate into the ground. Or what is called wet retention, which is a pond. That's what's pictured on the bottom right. And so there are ways to derive what type of nitrogen removing effects those two technologies have. The state folks accept those calculations readily. But the real challenge is, as you can see maybe from these pictures, they're land intensive. They're not as effective down here where we live when you have a high water table, because high water doesn't allow new water to percolate into the ground as quickly as you would like, which is really what these technologies are relying on, in particular the dry retention. And the treatment volume is limited. It's not on a continuous basis, it's fixed. So in the picture on the top, only the volume that you can calculate from the seasonal high water mark or the water table to the top of the embankment there is what you can treat. It's also predicated on an infiltration rate, so how fast it can percolate into the ground, which is dependent on your soils and your water table again. So once you meet that volume, you enter into a bypass mode. The remaining water that comes from a storm event, a rain system, once that volume is exceeded, the remaining water then just goes straight to the river without treatment. So those are the reasons that we started to look for different ideas. The other main reason is not unlike Estero. Bonita Springs is a relatively new community here in Southwest Florida. We only incorporated in 2000, and we don't have a lot of land that we inherited through tax defaults or that we acquired, in the infancy of our city. So we don't have a lot of unused real estate that is sited within the freshwater basin of the Imperial that we could develop large land-intensive projects. So we started to think a little bit outside the box and say, well, look, is there something else that we could try, maybe not recognized by the regulators yet, that would be more effective and less intensive on the land use aspect of it. So that's what led to looking at an emergent technology, which has a really fancy name for a very simple idea, and that is the bioreactor. Why we looked at it, I touched on earlier, is the ability to use land not just in one single use, but that we can do other things. The bioreactor in this photo is actually underground, so we were able to construct a parking stall above it. It does benefit from a high water table, which I'll get into in a little bit, and it allows for a continuous treatment. The final piece is we feel that this technology is scalable both to larger sizes than the 3-acre site that we currently built, and smaller. So we see a real possibility here. So Bonita embarked on building a bioreactor. We really were looking at technology that had been used in the Midwest to treat farm field runoff. And we kind of tweaked it and reapplied it to see if we could address stormwater runoff that was heading to the Imperial River. So what does a bioreactor do? A bioreactor mimics what happens in nature already in the nitrogen cycle. And what it is mimicking is the layer in the soil that is anaerobic, which is oxygen starved. It's circled here in this image. It's usually you achieve an anaerobic layer either by depth, from surface, maybe 8 inches or more in depth down. But another real easy way to create an anaerobic system, which is starved of gaseous oxygen, is to have it inundated with water. So I mentioned that a bioreactor benefits from a high water table. Well, in the rainy season in downtown Bonita, by the time we get to September, the water is generally 18 inches to 2 feet below the natural ground soil elevation. So we're kind of on floating on a sea of groundwater. So the bioreactor leverages that, because when you have high groundwater in the soil, saturated in the soil, you have an instantaneous anaerobic soil layer. So that's what we're trying to leverage. It is a natural process that occurs. And what goes on in the anaerobic layer is natural bacteria that rely on organic material, which is anything with carbon, that are part of the decay process, take over. So you may have seen stop action photos of decomposition of a tree in a forest, and it happens very quickly, through camera sequence. Well, if it was saturated or submerged in water, that process would be much slower. And the reason is the bacteria that decay using oxygen are very quick at decaying organic material. Their cousins that live in the anaerobic layers are very slow at decaying organic material, but they decouple nitrogen that is entrained in the water and turn it into a gaseous form. So what we're trying to do here is really leverage that process and take advantage of our own natural surroundings and natural processes in nature. So how did we do it? We sought $250,000 back in 2014 from the state legislature through a legislative appropriation. We went to work on our plans, and as we came close to being construction ready, we were able to garner another $100,000 from the South Florida Water Management District. And then the city partnered with its own funding to the tune of $450,000 for a total project cost on our phase 1 of $800,000. What we built is essentially an organic layer, which is wood chips. I'll show you some photos of it here shortly. And we buried them in the ground to leverage the high water table that will happen. And we applied them in a couple of different ways. So you'll see on the image on the right, we built 4 37-foot wide, 180-foot long cells. The photograph of the construction of them is down on the left. They're essentially a wood filter media wrapped in a filter fabric that is porous, that allows the groundwater to come through. And they are controlled through adjustable weirs on the inflow and outflow ends so that we can control the feed of water. Additionally, we constructed a 185-foot long, 4-foot diameter pipe that does not have free communication with the groundwater table, but allows water to move through it in a continuous manner, kind of like a Brita filter would. And within the beds themselves, some of them have a river gravel mix to increase the rate that stormwater can move through them. So the wood itself is really just a carbon source for the bacteria. It's photographed here in the top right. It's about a 3/4 inch minus product. It's free of bark, and it's a hardwood source, so no softwood. The pea gravel, photographed down on the left, is really just a true river rock. And then we did apply one other technology, which is an off-the-shelf technology that hadn't been proven, called an eco vault. It's photographed here in the middle, and it is a giant concrete box that has a proprietary media in the oyster bags or orange bags that you see there in the purple, and they are kind of trapped inside. So we're able to test this concept in multiple ways through the beds themselves. Some of the beds are just pure wood. Some of them have the river gravel to increase the flow rate of the water, and then also the 48-inch pipe in this eco vault that's pictured below. Here's some more photographs of what I've been talking about. The beds are on the top. What you really can't see too well, other than the top right, is the control structure. There's a little box, a rectangular box. It's got a piece of filter fabric covering it. It is what controls the rate that the water can move through the bed. The bed is about 4 foot in depth, and it's buried about 4 foot below natural ground elevation. And it is set on a downhill gradient so that water moves through it. Same with the pipe as well, which is down here on the bottom right. When the project was completed, we ended up with 101 stall parking lot, which is ironically what the property had been purchased for many years before by the city. The city of Bonita Springs holds a lot of events, particularly this time of year, and we have parking needs. We actually exceed almost all of the parking that we have in our downtown. So we were able to leverage this property, building a water treatment facility subterranean, and a parking lot above ground that allows for the festival parking that you see to the right. Simply put, the more parking we have downtown, the more large events we were able to hold, and ultimately, as our downtown redevelops, the more thriving the business community and the community at large will be. So we came back in 2018, and we did some very specific testing of the bioreactor concept and system. The way we achieved it was we rented what's called a Baker tank. It's pictured in the top right. It's a 21,000 gallon tank. And we fed it surface water that we had measured the levels of nitrogen and nitrate, which is a nitrogen compound, going in. And then we fed it through the 48-inch pipe that I showed earlier at a measurable rate, and then measured on the downstream side what removals we may or may not have achieved. And quite honestly, what happened next was a little bit of a surprise to all of us, in that the removal rates that we were able to measure during that testing were essentially off the charts in a good way. We were bringing in concentrations of nitrate, which is a nitrogen compound most commonly associated with fertilizer. So if you're fertilizing your yard, you're most likely applying some nitrate compound on your yard itself. And that component essentially was completely removed as it moved through this pipe that we had built as a bioreactor. The 98% efficiency is essentially the highest rating a lab can give us. They can't give us 100%. And as we went through the testing, we initially thought we would need to keep the water in the pipe for a period of a day, a 24-hour period. But what we learned is we were able to achieve this high removal efficiency even as we reduced the days down to just a little over a half a day. That's pretty amazing. And to give you some perspective, the stormwater pond that I showed earlier, the dry retention, those typically average about 60% removal efficiency. And it's only 60% of what you can send to it that can percolate into the ground in about a 3-day period. So once you've exceeded that volume, the remainder is bypassed with no removal efficiency. In the case of this, everything is treated, and it's all treated to 98% if you hang on to it for about 2/3 of the day. That is the big part of the story. That's probably why you've heard about this project. I do want to be clear. The 98% removal efficiency is for nitrate, which is a nitrogen compound, most commonly associated with fertilizer. But it is not all of the nitrogen compounds, but it is kind of the fertilizer component. So that is the big news. And that led us to some next steps. So the lessons we learned out of that result was that really we need a continuous water supply. The continuous water supply creates the anaerobic state year-round. And if you keep it anaerobic year-round, your decay rates start to plummet, and so your wood chips don't rot and disappear. So to that end, I've got a photograph of some studies that were done over a 15-year observation period. You can see little degradation in the pie tins. Those are coming out of the Midwest, where there is a freeze-thaw cycle, and the wood media is definitely dry, for large stretches of the year. Down below, just because someone's going to ask me, how long do you think the wood's going to last? I don't believe it will last as long as the ship pictured below, which is 4,000 years old in the Black Sea. However, that ship is in an anaerobic environment. So I think, for our perspective, we expect at least a 15-year lifespan, probably something longer than that, provided that we give it a continuous feed supply of water. The other thing we learned is that we didn't need to treat the water for very long. Like I mentioned before, somewhere over a half a day, and we're able to get full treatment of everything that we can feed to the system. Kind of like a Brita filter. We're able to filter this on a continuous basis. And then finally, a couple of things. We cited this project in our downtown. I mentioned it was a parking lot. It is adjacent to a very large infrastructure project that we did to spur economic development and redevelopment. But it also happens to be very close to the Imperial River. So within the area that we need to treat the Imperial River. So what we concluded is that, we have an opportunity here for a second phase where we could run a pipe to the Imperial. It's only about 1,800 feet away, and provide that continuous feed of water. So currently the project's designed just to treat rain, but we're looking at essentially hard plumbing it to the river to make it a continuous treatment type system. And the final thing, and I circled it in red here, and it's really why I talked about the idea of modeling up in the beginning, is these results are actual. They are not model based. So what you measure what comes into the system, and you measure what comes out. and you know what impact you had. It's, it is empirical in nature. The current regulatory environment and current project development is not quite. It really relies on those calculations I showed in the beginning of this presentation, and it makes some assumptions based off of some studies that were done in other parts of the state over the years for removal efficiencies. But at the end of the day, if you build a dry retention pond, you turn in a mathematical calculation and it is accepted. It is presumed that it will remove nutrients at the rate that you said. There is no way to have, or there is no component that requires that you measure it after the point of treatment, because it's fairly difficult. You're essentially sequestering water and forcing it into the ground, and you really, at that point, you've lost it. It doesn't have a return basis. So armed with those pieces of information, we started to look and say, well, what if we looked at a second phase with these removal efficiencies and made some assumptions on nitrate levels coming in? And we started to think, we could probably build a project that has the ability at least to remove somewhere around 800 pounds of nitrogen, 895. And that may seem like a small number, but our quota is 9,000 pounds. We've by model removed about 3,000 to date, a little bit more than that. So that's a fairly significant number. The other thing that makes it significant is if we build the second phase and we continuously feed it, we're looking at about $1.6 million in project cost, which leads to a removal rate of about $115 per pound of nitrogen you remove at 895 pounds. For planning purposes, not including land acquisition, the general number that's used for nitrogen removal is $638 a pound, based on project averages that the Florida Department of Environmental Protection has been tracking. So something that can remove it at $115 looks like it's promising for cost effectiveness. Very promising. So to that end, we, in the fall of 2019, we applied for a $400,000 grant from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to treat algal blooms, because algal blooms do grow off of excess of nitrogen in the water around Southwest Florida. And we were successful in that application. We received the $400,000. We actually then went and put $400,000 of the city's funds together. And we are currently in a design build project delivery for phase 2 of the Phelps Avenue bioreactor. So what we're going to do there is hardwire or hard plumb a withdrawal system from the Imperial River and feed it into the infrastructure we've already built and do some post-treatment on the far end. So that project, I've been in bi-weekly design meetings. It will probably go under construction, I don't know, sometime in the summer of this year, where we're on track for currently. The other thing we did is partnered with Florida Gulf Coast University to fund a water steward position. And we baked into that scope of services sampling of the phase 2 bioreactor project, because we feel that there's even more good information to come as that project gets completed, and we want to be working with the university as those results become public knowledge. And then finally, as Jim mentioned, we did receive the Florida League of Cities Environmental Stewardship Award for the phase 1 project. So that's really it. I probably glossed over some of the key features. I do want to point out, when we built this project, it returns the water that's treated to the Imperial River via the stormwater system that runs along Old 41. So when we plumb it with a withdrawal system that will give it a constant feed, the water will come in. be treated by what we built, and then it leaves through a conventional storm sewer system and returns directly to the Imperial River. I think that's it. I open to any questions. I hope I've kind of explained what is a simple idea with a fancy name that has some exciting promise.
Thanks very much, Matt. There are some questions, but let me ask you to just let the people know what your email address is in case they have any direct questions of you to follow up.
It's Matt, M-A-T-T, and then a period, Feeney, which is F-E-E-N-E-Y, at city, C-I-T-Y, of, O-F, Bonita, B-O-N-I-T-A, Springs, S-P-R-I-N-G-S, dot or period, O-R-G. That's the key part.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. So look, folks, anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make to Matt? We're going to excuse him to do some business in a moment, but we'd like to know if there are any questions out there. Just raise your hand, or if you have a question, in those of you who are participating. I don't see any at this point.
You do.
I see Barry for just a second.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we get to the folks that are out there. Okay, Barry, go ahead.
I guess I have a couple of things, Matt. Not wonderful presentation, by the way.
Very good.
Where are you going to build the next one?
Oh, that's a great question. It's right here. No. I do have a place in mind, but the thing is, the second phase that we're in the process of designing right now. So when I say design build, I don't know if you're familiar with that way of delivering a project, but essentially the contractor is in control of the engineers, and that $800,000 contract is to design it and build it. And so it's in a not to exceed amount. So the ship has sailed, so to speak. We're moving down that path. We have some other concepts that we're going to be applying in that project on the front end in terms of pre-treatment, and then on the post end. So when you go into an anaerobic environment, one thing I didn't touch on is to get that bacteria to do its job. It depletes the oxygen level. It's in an oxygen-starved environment.
I got it.
Well, if you caught, the real reason we have this nitrogen rule is because of the oxygen levels in the Imperial. So one of the things we're doing in phase 2 is we will be increasing oxygen as it leaves the system. So that we don't create fish kills or something like that. We also have some pre-treatment components. I know you're going, why is this follow with phase 2? If those components are successful, there'll be it'll be another big deal, honestly. So if that works, then I think we will look to a second phase. It will be sited in the same areas, that you saw there. There's only a few places we can do projects, that count. And we've got some property we obtained through some settlements not too long ago that I think would lend themselves probably to a larger facility and more continuous basis. When I first was thinking about this idea, I wasn't thinking about large treatment. We have a lot of open swales. I know Estero probably doesn't, but maybe in the older parts of the community you do. Open ditches that most folks would like to see enclosed. And the thought here was that you could do something that was somewhat passive in nature, right? and inexpensive. You can buy plastic pipe that is traffic rated. We do it here in the city, and you could make this like a railroad siding, if you know what a railroad siding is, and have a kind of a passive treatment system, and then take away the open swale system that folks really aren't interested in, but that do serve some purpose in environmental protection and treatment. So here you could do that and still have a positive impact. So the phase 2, yeah, I've got a site in mind, but it really hinges on what happens in this this second phase.
Let me take that a bit further. How many, I guess for lack of a better term, how much acreage would need to be treated to really have an effect on the water in the city of Bonita Springs, bearing in mind that agriculture is 5 times greater problem of nitrogen than is residential? And how are you going to clean all the agricultural nitrogen?
Well, agriculture is supposed to clean its own nitrogen. That's part of the BMAP. I think that's a fair question, but the way we've approached this is, we have a quota. It's 9,000 pounds, right? Currently, the way this system works is it's all done by a mathematical model. There's not a lot of verification on the downstream end. One of the things that came out of this project is, holy cow, it is absolutely measurable and verifiable. Now, we're looking at things to increase the efficiencies, honestly, and effectiveness, but I think our thinking has always been, we're trying to get the regulators to accept this technology as they have with the other ones I talked about, with some range of efficiency, right? And then we'll work to actual reductions, because this is a pretty cost-effective technology. And then, to your question, if it really does work, that effectively, then maybe it can be something that others can adopt and learn from us. So we very much went into this knowing that we weren't going to get any credit to begin with. We were really trying to figure out how we could get the regulators to accept it. I think we've turned some of that corner with the work I just showed you. And I think there's another opportunity to really solidify that as the second phase comes forward. And then that ends up as a more global discussion, about the issues that you're talking about.
Good luck. I think it's great.
Thanks.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
But I don't want to oversell this. We don't know. Who knows? We're just trying to figure out how to do this so that we don't build retention ponds everywhere. The photo I showed you, the green grassy area that's a retention pond, I came here in 2012. That's the first water quality project the city was doing at that time. It is in the downtown area, and it is maybe 100 feet from the river. And that technology has its place. You see it on roadside treatment, in places, but it really is not fitting for a downtown. And I don't, sometimes they put this in the spiel. I'll tell you now, they tore down houses to build that. And I just got here as it was being built. And the guy who lives behind, for the first several years, would call and complain, and rightfully so, about the frogs and the snakes. And so, there's a disconnect here in
The downside, yeah.
in effectively treating the environment and citing it context sensitive. Like, you can dig all the dry retention ponds you want out in the woods. That's fine. We've got a project going on right now that's a restoration project called Pine Lake Preserve. It very much utilizes those more conventional treatments and concepts. But you start building in an urban environment, not that we're Chicago, but you got to have some other tools in the toolkit.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. It looks like Donald Sutton has a question for you, Matt.
Okay, my question is, do you see in the future where you have big developments requiring them to use this technology instead of doing some of those detention basins? Like when you look at Bonita Bay, you know, they have space to use that to get rid of some of their nitrogenous waste.
Well, the short answer, I wouldn't say mandating. But the short answer is, I'm hopeful that this can become something that can be used by others. Not that, look, I build roads and sidewalks and everything else. This isn't my whole job here. But the problem and the real reason we looked at this is we don't have a bunch of land, okay? And so when you look at doing a project, we were looking for something that was cost effective, made sense, and would work, quite honestly. The reason I point this out is if you're not well versed in the nitrogen regulations and the nutrient regulations that exist, like Bonita's, or that are coming, your question becomes very relevant. So, for example, in Bonita, Spring Creek, the estuarine part of it, the part that's saltwater, runs from the bay in the Cerro Bay to the US 41 bridge, okay? And there is a list, it's called the Verified Impaired Waters list of the state of Florida. You can find it on the DEP's website. And what you'll see is that the state has measured and verified that there is a problem with nitrogen, amongst other things, in that section of water, in that creek. Well, if you know the regulatory process, the fact that they have verified that means that they are asking the federal government to establish the TMDL, which is what I talked about in the presentation. And if that happens, then you get the BMAP, which is the how are you going to get there part of the regulatory environment. Well, if that occurs, it's a slow process, it'll take 10 years. But if it occurs, the major stakeholders or the major landholders are private gated communities. The entire southern shoreline of that creek is Bonita Bay. 3/4 of the northern shoreline is Pelican Landing. How do you site projects? There's no public roads in there. How do you site those projects? So to your question, it's not about a mandate. It's about there are rules coming that will lead to difficult discussions. And if there aren't other technologies, something like this that would be out of sight, out of mind, but effective, we're going to have much more difficult discussions between communities, regulators, the state, and on and on. But
okay, listen, because time, we're really going to move ahead. So Matt, you can leave. I know you're a busy guy if you like, and then we'll just continue on with ECCL business. Kudos to you and Bonita Springs for taking this on. It was quite visionary, and hopefully other communities, whether it be Estero or others, see the value in it and start to do that as well. We need to do something about cleaning up this water. It's so important. So thanks again, Matt. Appreciate it.
you're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for listening to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me briefly just update some folks on what we talked about last month with ECCL has approved management's recommendation to apply for an IRS designation to change us from a 501(c)(4) to a 501(c)(3). The board also recently approved the requisite changes in the ECCL bylaws. Just to remind you again, folks, where we're going and why we're going in this direction. A 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization is qualified to receive contributions that are tax deductible. Right now, we do have a 501c3 and we can get tax deductible deductions for those who donate. However, there are some disadvantages to the way it's set up now. There's more of an advantage if we become the 501c3 in and of itself. It's giving us more control. It helps us to self-manage our current foundation. We're eligible to receive grants, which we couldn't. It was very difficult to do, to try to work through a third-party person managing the foundation. We'll control the investment management. That's another thing that would be under our wing. And again, we improve our public image. The ECCL, like most 501c3s, has an intrinsic advantage when you're a 501c3 because people see those kinds of organizations as being people that are committed to society and to improve whatever their specific focus is. So it's really good for us. And there are some legal and short and long-term tax benefits for us to move in that particular direction. Last week, we scheduled a brief Zoom meeting to have members of the organization, ECCL representatives vote and approve our bylaws. At the Zoom meeting, the members in attendance unanimously approved the bylaws, and shortly we will apply to the IRS to change the ECCL's current designation to a 501c3 designation. That's what John Quin, our CFO, is moving forward on, doing a terrific job getting us in that direction. And shortly we'll be making that application. Again, I may have mentioned in the past, it could take 6 months to a year for it to happen, but we're going to keep moving in the direction that we believe we're going to be getting it, and then trying to really leverage that 501c3 designation as soon as we can to improve our position. Are there any questions or comments on that issue or program? Anybody at all? Okay, so let me turn it over to Mark Novitski. Mark will highlight some of the activities of several of our advocacy councils. Mark?
Yes, February was a busy month, even though it was short. We did send a letter to the director of Lee County Parks and Rec, making sure we're in the discussions when you're talking about access to Larry Kiker Preserve. He came back and said, sure, we'll include you. We've asked the Lee County Parks and Rec and the county commissioners if we can have our Veterans Recognition Park within the community park of Estero there, within sight of the bandstand. We're waiting for an answer on that one. We got a small win on the Environmental Council. They're actually putting up porta potties at the spring break next week for the Hapatachi Center rather than using the untested. Don't know what the condition of the septic system there is, so you know that's a small win. The Health Council, they're working on reviewing Lee Health's market needs assessment for 2020. What do we as residents of Estero need? And there's also going to be a vendor fair at Lee Health Coconut Point on April 17th. We recruited and have our safety co-chair, Mark Russett from Stony Brook. We'll probably introduce him next month. We had a great Adopt a Highway February. To date, we've already got almost 3,000 pounds. And Corkscrew Road widening's probably happening to start in May of 2021, phase 1. So busy times on all our councils. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Are there any questions to Mark on some of the issues he raised? Anybody? Okay. All right, so let me get to the executive management team, and I'm going to start with Allan Bowditch. Allan is our Chief Communications Officer, and he is going to give us a brief presentation on a major program where we've been moving ahead on for a number of months, and that's the history of the ECCL. So Allan, I'll turn over to you, and you can put your slideshow up and talk us through it.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Just bear with me for a brief second while I just get the slideshow up, which shouldn't be more than a second or two. So
there it is. Good.
Yeah. If I can, there we go. Okay, first of all, before I start, I want to thank Jim Shields, who is one of the board directors of the ECCL, for focusing on this particular initiative. This isn't set out by any means to be the ECCL patting themselves on the back for issues that have contributed to Estero as we see it today, but the key objectives are twofold. First of all, to ensure that we have a record of the developments and actions that have contributed to Estero being what it is today, and of course for the future, but also to acknowledge and remember the efforts made by many individuals who, through their skills and commitment, with no financial reward, have helped to make Estero a very special place to live, work, and play. In starting this effort, Jim Shields and myself have already spoken to a large number of people, in some cases twice, which has amounted to about 10 hours of discussion. We'd like to thank already those that have helped us in this, Nick Batos, Phil Douglas, Dan Dronkers, Don Eslick, Bob Leinish, Jack Leinish, Linda Teco-Roach, Roger Strelo. We'd also like to especially thank Lee County Commissioner Frank Mann and former Lee County Commissioner Ray Judah, and the publisher of the Estero Life magazine, Gary Israel, for giving us their time in helping us with this venture. What we see doing in order to provide documents that address the history of the ECCL is basically to have three parts. One, of course, as you see, if those of you who can see the slides, part one would be to cover the period from 2000, when ECCL was first established, although it was called ECHO at the time for a few years, to 2010. Part two, obviously 2011 to 2020, and part three from 2021 onwards. Within the first part, which has already been started, and we should be able to have a documentation of this first part of the history of the ECCL probably next month or thereabouts, we're going to be featuring on the evolution, if you like, from ECHO, which stood for the Estero Committee of Homeowners. That was what the original name was for the group of people who came together, and then that morphed into the ECCL in about 2003, when there was a need to have a rather more substantial structure to it and a fundraising aspect to the organization. We will cover the threat to Estero during this period, the Coconut Road and I-75 interchange, which, as you realize, does no longer actually exist or never came about, the community plan, which I'm going to say a few words about in a moment, Coconut Point and the development of that, the issues relating to mining out on East Corkscrew Road, and the way in which the ECCL tried to establish or to reduce flight plans that interfered with aircraft flying over Estero. I have here a slide which actually says, for those who can't see it, where is this? And those of you who can see it may be forgiven for thinking that, is this some part of Estero? You know, it has lovely palm trees and very nice styled homes and businesses. And the answer to the question is no, it isn't Estero. And for those who can see it and guess the answer correctly, you get a gold star from me. But actually, this is a picture of Boca Raton. So why am I putting a picture of Boca Raton up here? Well, in fact, back in the early part of that period, the individuals who were part of the ECHO organization recognized that with the developments that were going on in Estero at that time, there was a need to try to at least formulate a plan that would give the buildings, and particularly the commercial buildings, you know, a set of standards that they would work towards. And so they examined where in Florida was the best place that had actually set in place these standards and a community plan that addressed those aspects. And they identified Boca Raton as the place which did have some very strict standards, but which had contributed to a wonderful place to live. And anybody who's actually been to Boca Raton, I'm sure will be able to attest to that. So it was from those discussions with the council and the people involved at Boca Raton that essentially a similar plan was put into place and has been in place now during the rest of this time, which has greatly contributed to the style and the pattern of life that we see here in Estero. Obviously, within this report on this period, we will, of course, be addressing these many other things as well. But it's not just the ECCL, if you like, that maybe might be seen to be patting itself on the back. I have two comments here, one from County Commissioner Frank Mann, who said about the value of the ECCL as follows. He said, if the ECCL had not been there, we might have seen a large part of Lee County looking like wall-to-wall concrete, which I fear and oppose. As you guys, the ECCL had not been there, I just don't know what would have happened. And former County Commissioner Ray Judah said the breadth and depth of the ECCL's influence was not just Estero, it was county-wide. And what he was meaning by that was that the group of people who were involved in this development of the community plan also talked to a number of other communities in and around our area who were also so enamored by what had been done that they wanted to know, you know, how we had gone about it and how they could implement a similar set of standards. And finally, from County Commissioner Frank Mann, as regards to the ECCL for the future, he said that the ECCL's perspective is desperately needed in Lee County. And so although much of the discussions was about what had gone on in the past, we also wanted to know, you know, how from his perspective as a county commissioner, he felt that was there a place and was there a role for the ECCL going forward? And he certainly gave a lot of endorsement to that particular issue. So it was just a very brief overview of where we're at the moment. It's a very fascinating aspect that we want to bring to people's attention for the reasons I've mentioned. And we will have more to say about that going forward. So again, thanks to Jim Shields, and thank you all for listening.
Jim, turn your head on.
Okay, you just missed some valuable words of wisdom. No, what I was saying is, thanks, Allan. I appreciate that. And I read through. I was fortunate. Allan shared a lot of the information, the actual dialogue between Allan and Jim and the folks they interviewed. They all put. I have to say kudos to both Allan and Jim. This is a lot of time, significant amount of time not only in setting it up and then actually having the interviews and then transcribing all of that and a variety of different other things that we think we'll use down the road. It was quite an excessive amount of time spent, and I really do appreciate that. Any questions for Allan on that issue? Anybody out there have a question or so or comment? Okay. By the way, there's a whole group of folks out there. Really a nice number, and I appreciate them being there. Okay, so that was Allan. I'd like actually John Quin to do a quick financial report, and then I'm going to turn it over to Barry to wrap this up. John?
Thank you, Jim. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. For the month of February, we had revenue of approximately $3,200. After spending, we added to our funds by $1,400. We've got about $8,000 of outstanding membership, where I'm in the process of contacting them with the help of Barry Freedman. To understand where we are in the process, this is February. A good deal of our spending will be done in the fall. So right now, most of our revenue comes in the first 2 or 3 months of the year. We're building up some funds right now and look forward to that. Jim mentioned that we are going to be doing a application. The first process is to file our amendments to our articles of incorporation, and hopefully they'll be sent out this week. That's once they are approved, we'll go into the process of applying to the IRS. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you, John. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Barry Freedman. Barry's going to introduce a lot of folks to a concept that he's been working on for quite some time, and I've had some fingers in it, and that's a virtual visitor center. So Barry, you're on.
Okay, thank you. And I know there's about 3 dozen people on the call, and I won't take more than 3 or 4, 5, maybe 5 minutes. So please don't go off yet. I'm not going to give you a PowerPoint presentation, although we have some very pretty ones we've worked with for this project over the past year. You've had enough PowerPoint this morning, so if I can in just a few sentences give you some background, some history, and tell you where this project is going. When you were raising your family, traveling around the country, like most of us, you probably stopped at a Chamber of Commerce, a city hall, or what in many cities is called a visitor center, to pick up a bunch of brochures and maps to try to figure out, okay, where do I take the kids to eat? Where should we stay tonight? Where is there a campground? And so on, as you traveled learning about the growth of this country and treating your family to what's available in this country. Well, that doesn't happen that way today. People still travel, of course, although last year was a bit of a bust. Today, they use either their phone or the internet to try to figure out where do we go next. So it was just about a year ago this week that Jim and I were at a meeting of the city management, the mayor, vice mayor, assistant manager, and so on, talking about how do we get more and more people to not only come to Estero to live, work, and play, but to visit here and ultimately figure out if they do want to live, work, and play here. But the idea that came out of that meeting was to create something that we have learned to call a virtual visitor center, which is nothing more than a website that will attract people from all over the world, who whenever they hear the word Estero or anything about what's going on in Estero, will bring them immediately to that website. And now I've learned things like SEO, something about strategic
search engine optimization.
Yeah, optimization. You know, these are tech words that the new generation knows how to work with. I can look at it from 10,000 feet, but to tell you how it works, I don't know, and I don't think I have to know. So what we did over the summer, through last spring and summer, was to start by visiting online websites that were created by cities and towns all over this country and around the world. It wasn't that difficult because all you got to do is go on the internet and ask for virtual visitor centers, and it's amazing what pops up. Well, the first thing we had to do was figure out, what kind of a visitor center are we going to be with a city that has a year-round population of mid 30,000 and a year-round population that is maybe 60, I mean, a seasonal population of around 60,000, it might get to 90,000 in the next 10 years. Look at the growth going on East Corkscrew with 5,000 homes going up in 3 or 4 different areas. There's 15, 20,000 people that'll be there in the next 2 or 3 years. So we looked at several sites. Since we couldn't go out and visit physically with trying to get new members, what I did was visit with a dozen, no, not quite a dozen, maybe 8 what are called digital marketing companies or professional marketing organizations, most here in this area and a couple from around the country, to find out what their experience is and has been in developing these websites. And we learned a tremendous amount. We also learned what it's going to cost to do it and how we sustain the management of such a website. Now, as you all know, if you want to go out to eat tonight at pick your own restaurant, you can go online and look at the menu of that particular restaurant. You can go to JetBlue Park and figure out when and if I can get tickets to a ball game. But doing that now, you go to an individual website, an individual company or organization. If Estero had a website, let's say we call it experienceestero.com, for lack of a term that's not been accepted yet, but it's a possible term we might use. Anytime you looked up something in the village of Estero online, it would bring you to our website. So companies, we presume, and we've already talked to several, would love to have space on that website so they could, in effect, advertise and promote themselves to those people who will come here to visit and ultimately live, work, and play. For many cities, the funding of both the development and the maintenance of that type of a website is done through their city's occupancy tax. Well, we don't have an occupancy tax here in Estero that we keep. The occupancy tax here that people pay when they come and stay at a motel or a hotel here goes to Lee County and is dispersed out to the community through the Lee County Visitors and Convention Bureau. We have been in contact with them, and they are interested in helping us with the underwriting of this project to some extent. To what extent, we do not have a number at this point. We've also talked to many businesses who are looking to participate at one level or another. Some might be a platinum member, and somebody else might be a gold member, a silver member, a bronze member, and so on. And there'll be funding levels at various, for these various levels. The last thing we did was to try to put together a task force, which consists of 7 people. Jim Gilmartin and Allan Bowditch are on it. Kyle Coleman, the assistant manager of the village, is on it. Alex Allan from 239, Joyce Johnson, and Gary Bonvilla. Now, we met also with Nolan Rollins from the Chamber to realize that this project requires citywide participation. The village needs to be involved, the Chamber needs to be involved, ECCL needs to be involved, the Historical Society needs to be involved. Think about what Allan just told you about the history of Estero. It's wonderful to have it, but where's anybody going to find it if they want to know about it? It'll obviously be on the website. Kyle has been working on a project for the city that's, I guess it's called a geo map. Basically, it brings up a map and you put your cursor on, say, Stony Brook, and it brings up everything there is to know about Stony Brook. How many people live there, the type of housing, type of amenities they have, and so on. That would be available through the Estero website. So at this point, we're looking to put together a proposal, a request for a proposal to go to a couple of what are called destination marketing development companies. There are a couple that have projects that they work on, some 900 to 1,000 of them around the world, a lot of experience. And we'll be hopefully choosing one or more of those to do our initial development. And then we're perhaps working with some local destination marketing companies on ongoing management. So in closing, if anyone there has any ideas about things you'd like to see included in an Experience Estero website, and we're talking the greater Estero area, you can write to us at the following website, visit esterofl@gmail.com. That's been a very active Gmail address, as you can well imagine, as we have communicated with lots of destination marketing cities around the country. Linda, if you're still here, Linda Tecco Roach, Donna Sutton, Joyce Johnson, and some others actually did some research for us with a questionnaire that we developed for them to visit with these people from around the country to, again, formulate what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be included, how to benefit, who benefits. And we now realize this is a project for everyone to be included. So you'll hear more about it as we grow through this at the rest of the year. Any questions? If not, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Barry. Good segue. Are there any questions of Barry to learn anything more about, or any comments on this effort? While you're thinking about whether you have a question or not, in essence, and in one line for this, it's really a one-stop shop. That's what it boils down to. Instead of going to all kinds of different websites to try to find out any specific information you want, our goal, our vision of this is that we will be promoting this website to people. Come here and learn everything you want to know, everything you want to know about it. And Barry touched on some of the ways that we would fund it, the kinds of folks who would be interested in being involved in it or partners with it. So we're going to try to do what we can with this. As Barry said, we know roughly what it would cost to get this off the ground. We know there's some funding available, so we're going to have to figure out how we're going to get enough of it in place to kick it off. My perspective on this, and Gary may agree or not, I'm sorry, Barry may agree or not agree, is I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking to get something off the ground. We can always change it. We can always upgrade it. We can always make it better than it is. But right now, there is nothing that gives people who have any interest about estero or a place where, or a process where they would get that kind of information simply by going online and asking a question. That's the SEO that Barry is talking about. So it's a good movement. Barry's put a significant amount of time in this. Other people have helped him get where we are today, and we hopefully will move forward with this sooner rather than later. In that little soliloquy, I was looking for any more questions, and we don't have any. So that really wraps up the ECCL's activities. I really want to thank Matt Feeney. I know he had to take off, but it was really, I think, a very insightful and interesting presentation about what that's all about and how we could use simply, I look at it as nature itself to clean its own water. And I think that's really a great thing to do. So thanks for joining us today. Next month, our speaker will be, we have them booked already, and that's estero Vice Mayor Katie Arrington and the Lee Health Coconut Point's Alex Greenwood. He's the man who runs it all. And he will be talking about some of the potential use of land around the Coconut Point area and also the 46 acres that are on the corner of Coconut and 41. So I think you'll all be interested in hearing what they have to say. Again, thank you very much. And at this point, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you again. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good job. Thank